Hello. We're going to be talking about rhythm exercise group number 4 now. And if you notice, it is introducing two new things. The new type of rest there is the eighth rest, and the new type of note is the eighth note by itself. So we've been doing pairs of eighth notes before, and now we're going to get to see them by themselves. And in this exercise, this is going to require maybe a little bit more than you used to, because we're now going to be switching back and forth between low and high a little bit more frequently. So just make sure rhythm is always first in terms of your priorities, but make sure that you're getting the targets down as well. And if we look at 26 through 29, you see a new notational element in here, which is just, this is not hugely important. I just want to explain it so that you don't overlook it and think it doesn't mean anything. Is at 26, you notice at the beginning or just after the time signature, just after the 4/4. And at the end of that line, you have a bigger bar line with kind of wings on it and a couple dots on either end. Those just mean to repeat whatever's in between those two lines. So when we get to especially number 28, and when we get over to number 33 on the next page, I do want you to make sure that you're minding those and that we're not repeating things arbitrarily, but that the music is saying to do that. Okay, so if you notice, everything here is going to be at two different speeds, 72 beats per minute, 96 beats per minute. So that's a pretty big spread. That's like almost a 30%, 33, it's a third of the tempo more. Or maybe even a little bit more than that. No, it's exactly a third more. And let's really use these slow speeds to make sure that we're doing things accurately, both rhythmically, with counting if you can. Remember, we're always trying to put verbal counts to this, to put a language to rhythm, so that we can relate things against the pulse in a consistent way, as opposed to just singing something and hoping someone understands what you mean, right? That's a very common way that rhythm and music gets portrayed, but it's always helpful to have a kind of a universal backup, and so that's one of the things that counts are good for. So we're going to do everything at 72 and at 96. I'm going to go through the page 26, 27, 28, and 29 at 72, and then I'm going to go back and go through it at 96 beats per minute. So you're going to have a little bit of a chance to play around with things. The cool thing about the YouTube feature is that, especially if you are using the desktop browser, you can go into the change playback speed. You can go to the custom, and you can adjust it all over the place. So 72 is too slow, 96 is a little too fast. You can actually just increase it like 10% if you want, and that you can notch your way up. If you want to just go 72 right to 96, be my guest. But if you experience a little frustration going to 96, that's one way that you can kind of fill in the gaps and nudge yourself up in terms of comfort and comprehension. All right, so if we look at 26, we have 4 measures there. We have a measure of eighth notes, then a measure of eighth note, eighth rest, eighth note, eighth rest. Whether it's a note or a rest, it receives the same type of count, right? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So for number 26, we're going to be counting all of the eighth notes the entire time. And that's very useful to keep a place in the measure. Rather than just counting what you're doing, it's actually more important to count what you're not doing, right? Because something has to be there in place of an action. You're putting a count. It's a placeholder. It's a mile marker on the highway. It's something to make sure that you are not being passive in the silence, right? We want to have an active silence, even though they're very, very small, and we can almost use momentum to get through a lot of these. So let's listen to 72 beats per minute, and we're going to play number 26 2 times. I'm going to count it out loud. Here we go. 1, 2, ready, and go, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3, 4 and again and 2 and 3 and 4. So I just jumped in without explaining much because I wanted to see what happens when I'm just asking you to do it. Now, hopefully you noticed that there are two different sounds. There's a bass and there's a tone. And what I did here is I want you to draw your attention to the downbeats having the low sound. The downbeats meaning 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Downbeats, by the way, are called that. There's a number of reasons they can be called the downbeats. One, because it's when your foot comes down. If you're tapping your foot normally, obviously we can tap our foot anywhere we want, but normally you down, down. And also for conductors, done, 2, 3, 4. That's when their baton comes down, right? And then the upbeat would be the in-between. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Or down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. So that's just a little bit of a vocabulary. The word upbeat can also, is used as an adjective. It can mean fast, but generally it means something other than the strong beat that you're automatically going to feel first, right? Upbeat means the in-between beats. Eighth notes generally mean the in-between, the and counts generally mean upbeats. So let's do 26 again. We're going to do it. We're not going to do every single thing twice because you'll get the hang of this. And also there's a lot of repetition built in. And of course, YouTube, you can replay anything you want. So let's do 26 again. And I want you to count as much as you can. Bass, tone, bass, tone, bass, tone, bass, tone, bass, bass, bass. They're in the same place. Then bass, tone, bass, tone, bass, tone, bass, tone, 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 bass, right? So we have the tone on the upbeat, bass on the downbeat. Here we go. 1, 2, 26, both times. Count. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. You probably noticed also that I don't change sides. And that's because there's no real reason to. Nothing's fast enough to require both hands in either spot. And also, you can harness some momentum. Momentum is a big thing. You guys are movement experts, so you understand the usefulness of momentum and figuring out where to apply it, and then also figuring out when you need to shift it or turn it. Okay, so getting into number 27. So now as the bars start to have more things in them, each measure of music that you're looking at, and there's a more of a variety. Now we have eighth notes and eighth rests, whereas before we hadn't had those sorts of things separated out. The bar starts to get a little crowded, and so what I did here was in the second, third, and fourth measures of 27, I just put a little dotted line down the middle of the bar. So in other words, just before beat 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So kind of the middle of the bar, like if I'm using the screen here, this is 1, 2, this is 3, 4. I'm putting a line between them. And that's just a way to help your eyes group things so that you don't lose sight of the bigger picture, which is that beat 1 is always, whether you're playing it or whether you're resting on it, beat 1 always comes at the beginning of the measure after the bar line. We can't start the measure with an and, even if it's an eighth rest. This is a common misunderstanding because we think eighth notes, we think and, but we still have to start on 1 in order to have an and. An and indicates in between, and if we haven't had something to hear or to rest on yet, we can't have an in between, right? So the number has to be the first thing in the bar, whether it's a note or a rest. Write that down for yourself in anywhere you feel like you're going to be able to remember it and use it for study or just to review. So I did it number 27. That's something that you might want to do for yourself as you go through these, is to put a line down the middle if you find it helps your eye track across the page. One thing that I have noticed is also that it does take a little bit of getting used to keep your visual focus on this. Don't try and watch my hands in place of reading the music. We do debone and other rhythms for that sort of learning, for that sort of processing. But in this case, I want you to use the notation as an alternative way of remembering how to play something, right? It's written down in language. That's why we write things down in the first place, is to remember them and to communicate them. I wrote this stuff and I still have to read it. I keep my eye going on across the page pretty consistently every single time. And so let's do number 27. And notice there are no repeat bar lines here, but we do have those halfway points. And this one, if you notice, all the downbeats still on the bass, all the upbeats still on the tone, but it's a little less predictable. It's a little bit more composed and less of a mathematical assignment of various sounds. So let's go 72 beats per minute again, and number 27, and I'm going to count the eighth notes the whole time, just so I don't lose track of it, and I advise you to do that too. So 27, yes, you could count it. 1, 2, 3, 4. That wouldn't be wrong. And if you're really comfortable playing music and you've had a lot of experience with it, totally fine. But if you're not sure about how to handle the next measure, you're looking ahead and going, what the heck is that? You're going to want to have those eighth notes going, 1 and 2 and 3, so that you're already rolling with this speed, whether it's notes or rest. This is in your mind, and then you can harness it for the second, third, and fourth measures. Let's go through this 27. Let's see how this goes. 1, 2, ready and go, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. All right, so kind of predictable, and then it starts to get changed a little bit more frequently. You should recognize the first two measures because they are kind of the last, similar to the last two measures of number 26. They're related. So with number 27, just make sure you're counting all the way through, that those quarter notes, you don't lose sight of where the eighth note is. Now, let's look at number 28. So we have repeat bar lines around every measure. So what do you think that means? It means we repeat every measure. We do every measure twice, and indeed, the book says each bar is to be played 2 times. And in this case, we have those X's, which mean did it stop? It's continuing to go. Okay, well, I'm going to stop it just in case.